Could I approve the recording? I'm Anna Jeffries. I am a member of the Post Alumni Board and help out with reunion planning and some different things. I will let Paul and Phil introduce themselves and share as much of their bio as they would like. But we're here today to talk about public records. We've gotten some feedback from Abby and her crew that they've had some challenges just getting access to documents in a prompt and efficient manner. So I think that'll definitely be a big topic of conversation today. But also just, understanding public records and knowing how to make a request is something I think that a lot of students look at. They feel as though if they go into an internship or a job, that's something they're going to need experience doing. I know that's something that I kind of had to learn on the fly in my first journalism job and was never particularly good at it, but I also was a feature writer, so I dodged most of those bullets. But I will let, like I said, Paul and Phil introduce themselves. Jessie Balmert was also planning to be on tonight. She may still join us, but she called me at 7 and said that the redistricting meeting that she is supposed to cover tonight was not going to start till 7:30 and was not anticipating it to be a fun or short meeting. So she has sent she sent me a really helpful document, Hunting Public Records, which I think does a really good job. She just kind of brainstormed a lot of the different resources that she has used to find records. And I'll make sure that I send that over to Abby to share with everyone in the newsroom. And Abby said I had at least one person logging into Zoom late, so there might be more people waiting in the waiting room soon. Tristan, if you don't mind kind of keeping an eye out. But Phil, Paul, you're up. Introduce yourselves. Maybe just share a little bit about your bio, and then we'll just kind of, if you've brought materials to share, we can go through those. If you guys kind of want to chat with Abby and kind of see what questions they have, I'm like I said, you guys know what you're doing, so I'll let you take it away.
All right, introduce yourself first, Phil.
Okay, twist my arm. I'm Phil Elliott, class of 03, was editor of the Post my senior year. Graduated without a job, so any seniors in here freaking out, stop freaking out. Things are going to be okay. Worked in Marietta, Ohio, right out of college, then spent 3 years in Evansville, Indiana, as the religion editor. Showed up as the county politics reporter and somehow wound up swapped over there. But I got really good at FOIA open records requests because it was during the time of the pre-scandal, the Catholic Church abuse scandal. So I turned the religion beat into a lot of hard news. Also, there was a really not enlightened FBI office who had a lot of interest in the Islamic Center of Southern Indiana. So got a lot of correspondence from them as well. Did grad school up at Columbia, came back to DC, where I worked my way up from an assistant to the politics editor to White House correspondent. Spent 9 years at the AP. I've been at Time since 2015, coinciding with a very marked pivot on transparency and open records in this town after the 2016 election. Currently, I'm spending a lot of time trying to get, successfully in a lot of cases, getting documents related to the January 6th failed insurrection. And we can talk about this during our Q&A, but there's always a pressure point for every one of these documents, and it might not be where you think it is, especially with January 6th. We have a FOIA, Congress has a subpoena. So there's a way to, no collusion, but there is a mutual interest in some members of the January 6th Commission getting material out through mainstream press. We saw a lot of this during impeachment. There was a lot of late night pen and pad briefings only for documents that we had requested and were denied from different parts of the federal government. but Congress was able to get them much more quickly than we could. And there's an application here. I'm sure there's always someone at the state legislature who wants to screw someone else. And, the enemy, my enemy is my friend. So I would say having some creative ways to approach the records you're trying to get is always in everyone's interest. It's also just a lot of fun to figure out who wants to screw someone else. And that's where being a sourced reporter is actually more important to my mind than being able to master a FOIA. Because if you have a source reporter telling you what you're looking for, phishing by FOIA is really dangerous and just pisses a lot of people off. So I have other stories from the Post all the way up through last week that we can talk about, but I'll turn it over to Paul. And it's good to see you, sir.
It's good to see you too, Phil. Yeah, it's great to be here actually, because Phil and I graduated together. Phil was the editor of the Post. I was his sports editor. And like Phil, I too plan to have a job working for the Seattle Times at an internship. It fell through. I had no job. Ended up doing a Scripps Howard News internship, and then went back to my hometown of Maumee, desperately looking for a journalism job. Sent out, it felt like hundreds upon hundreds of resumes, and ended up at the Key West Citizen in Key West, Florida. Was an assistant sports editor there before finally the Seattle Times came back and hired me and sent me out into one of their very small newspapers in Yakima, Washington, where I was there for about 3 or 4 years before I finally went to the Fayetteville Observer, working with some other colleagues of ours, posties as well. Worked there covering Duke and North Carolina basketball. This would be my very, very, very busy time of the year, normally with the tournament and everything going on. But at that time, I was definitely becoming very disenchanted and was having my own issues. FOIA requests for me, and Phil probably knows this better than most. I am a investigative reporter who also like to cover sports for a living, because I didn't like to go to school board meetings. And but I use that a lot in my sports, because again, sports are part of public institutions depending on the school. And I would often do that with my various beats. One of the last stories I worked on that I thought was a huge deal at the time, and now I think even OU has one, but they were kind of separating out the student athletes from the student body. They weren't going to the same classes. They had their own separate building. That's where they would go. That's where they would take all their classes. And to me, it just seemed like a rife situation for fraud. Not surprisingly, North Carolina, about 4 or 5 years that has been attached to some of that fraud, some other different scandals that universities have. But, getting in and seeing those abilities and everything else, I became very unfortunately disenchanted with newspapers. There's a lot of pressure when you start writing those type of stories where you're going after sports. They tend to be popular. A lot of times we would get that at the Post, don't you go to school here? Don't you want to be positive about your university? But you get that as well from North Carolina and other positive things that people just want to read about the positive things about the team, not the negative things. So to me, FOIA was always an interesting tool, because you need to understand sources first. I think Phil's exactly right, and I think Phil's a good person to talk to, because Phil, for me, was always the gatekeeper when I was at the Post. And when we were doing our requests and trying to communicate, because it is very important that you have a very good relationship with your sources and are able to evaluate what you need, most importantly, because if you don't know what your sources do every day, you're not going to know what type of records you need to request. And then more importantly, be seen and be involved, because I have to imagine in a COVID age, what is a reasonable time to turn around a records request has probably changed, and that's the type of lawyer work that I now do. I have given up the power of freedom of information requests, which really is, any Joe Schmo can do. And I've become a lawyer. I've been a lawyer since 2013. I work for a medium-sized regional firm up here in Cleveland, Ohio called Reminger. I am a shareholder for the last 2 years. I do estate and trust litigation And, subpoenas, that was a thing when Caitlin asked me to do this presentation. I was like, man, I haven't done a FOIA request in a very, very long time. Now I do subpoenas all the time, and very similar tests, very similar background. You'll be, they'll be using some of the same lingo. To me, FOIA is the exact same thing as a subpoena in a lot of ways, in that there has to be communication and there has to be professionalism. And this is really your first, and one reason why the Post is such an important part of my life, and I know it's been an important part of a lot of people's lives, is because it was maybe your first real taste of what it's like to be a professional in your college setting. And that's why the Post is so important. You get that opportunity to make those type of requests and make mistakes. You're not going to do everything right. You are going to upset people from time to time. And it's better to make those mistakes then than when you're, trying to figure out how you're going to get communications from January 6th. That's a totally different type of thing, that a different type of record request that is obviously politically charged and has a lot of different ins and outs. So to me, professionalism is going to be a big part of what we talk about today, but I'm very eager to hear what type of issues that you're dealing with as posties and how you are addressing them, because to me, each situation is different. I don't think any subpoena or any FOIA request that I've ever made is the same. How you are doing them, how you're approaching them, how you're handling them, they're important things. And then it's very important that the Post, as a united unit, understands what it's doing and communicates. I really think Phil, I always will remember, trying to do some of the record requests that I was doing. He would be working in communications. He had built up a relationship with the legal department at the school and would go over there and talk to them. And, we would also be discussing what previous requests did, because that is a problem. The school in your situation can wait some of you out, maybe wait for certain students to graduate, or wait for the school year, turn that request over in the middle of summer when nobody's there or nobody's going to be available, or care less about what the situation is. So there's a lot of different things that go on here, and this dance has probably been going on. It was going on long before Phil and I got to Ohio University, and it's going to continue long after. So I'm really interested to hear what the issues you're having. Obviously, I provide a legal background. I've turned in just a brief update of the OPRA, which is the Ohio Public Records Act, which is one that you're probably going to be dealing with the most unless you're doing federal requests like Phil is with FOIA. The law is going to change on April 29th, and you'll see some basic cites to the revised code. As a lawyer, I always recommend read the revised code. It'll put you to sleep, but you will learn quite a bit about the process and how it works as a whole. But I've tried to give you a very short synopsis of that so you can get a better understanding. And again, I'm definitely here to talk about and answer any questions from a legal perspective, given the fact that I also was a journalist doing these as well. So with that, Phil, do you want to, and we lost somebody today. Obviously, she did a great job talking about some of the issues she's seeing. She is dealing with the redistricting. I actually met with Judge Brunner at Justice Brunner at an event where she was talking about how she was up till 3 o'clock in the morning. And it became pretty clear the next day that she was writing the opinion to send the redistricting commission back to do another run here in Ohio. So that is where she is today.
Yeah, poor Jessie.
I know. So Phil, do you want to talk at all about some of your experiences here? Especially, I want to hear about what you're doing here with January 6th.
Yeah, happy to walk you through that. I mean, Paul flicked at the relationships here. Like, there was a time, so John Burns was legal director when I was in school, and legal used to be right next to the Post in Pilcher House. So before I do any FOIA, I'd walk over and pop in and bring John a coffee and be like, hey, this is the information we're looking for. Do we need to do this as a FOIA? Is there a way for us to get this without putting this on your desk? And he would call a department head or department chair and just be like, hey, give him what he wants. He's entirely entitled to it. This isn't trouble. Just give it to him. Don't make me bill your department or your unit hours. So it was in their interest to keep it off of legal as well. One of my favorite FOIA stories I did was during Obama's first term. And I wanted to chart the first year travel of the cabinet because I had a thesis that cabinet members were only going to swing House districts as they were trying to shore up, defend the Democratic majority and a Tea Party year that was coming. And, the reason that worked is I knew what I was asking for and had the parameters. I identified every congressional district that was over under 5%, 5 points in the 2008 election. Those were considered swing districts at the time, and mapped physically every cabinet member to those locations. And initially my editor was saying, FOIA the secretary schedules. I'm like, we do not want to be FOIAing every cabinet secretary, because that then means every council at every agency is going to be involved, and it's going to be completely inconsistent. But I mean, they're traveling at public events. So I went to White House Comms, regional communications, which handles the local press angle. And I just asked, hey, can you give me a list of every cabinet secretary's travel for the last year? You're tracking it. You know this. You have it on a calendar. And within 30 minutes, I had a complete Excel file that had already existed that I didn't need to make. But just being upfront with the sources about, this is what I want. Can you help me? Also, this is entirely public record. Like literally, you went to have a press conference. There's nothing secret here. Now, the cost of it got a little hinky, and we did have to FOIA the cost for some of the cabinet agencies that just didn't want to cooperate. And now, 2 impeachments later, and now when it failed insurrection, there's a lot of time that we spend as reporters with our sources on the professional staff of the January 6th Commission. And this is where I don't think I appreciated as an undergrad. It's not actually the people who have their names on the doors who run the thing, run institutions. It's the middle manager. It's the junior staffer. That is where so much of the university is run. Like the Deputy Assistant Secretary of State actually has more power on foreign policy in a region than the Secretary of State, because they are that person who's in that space every day and are an expert there. And befriending, or not really befriending, but sourcing up with those people who work on the front lines is incredibly useful. We saw this during impeachment. We're seeing it now January 6th. And it's not always the people, and I'll say this as just myself, you don't have to agree or share an ideology or even a goal with someone for them to be useful. Truly, Marjorie Taylor Greene has had more access to oversight documents of the DC jail than the Department of Justice has been able to get me. Like Marjorie Taylor Greene, she's a QAnon conspiracy theorist and kind of a terrible person who refuses to wear masks or go through metal detectors. She's just the id of the Republican Party right now. She is Donald Trump's favorite member of the House. She's really problematic for institutional Washington, but she somehow is getting all of this information and is sharing it. And her goal of, treating the January 6th people as political prisoners and getting them amnesty, like people who, destroyed my office in the Capitol probably aren't going to get a lot of sympathy from me, but they still deserve to be treated with humanity. They still have civil rights, and their civil rights in DC jails are being violated. So, Marjorie Taylor Greene has been really useful in getting internal reviews, IG reports that haven't been made available to us through FOIA requests through Main Justice. So that's where there's always, if you're starting with a FOIA as your starting point for a story, you're going to run into some real problems on your stories. You need to know what you're asking for and have some credibility with the people you're asking them for. Like if you're asking for all correspondence between the Capitol and the Department of Justice in the 3 months leading up to the insurrection, one, justice is just going to look at you with contempt and not really get you the 3 documents that you actually are asking for. And Paul, you will know this, they can bury you in discovery. Oh, you think you want that? Oh, here's everything you asked for. And you can figure out what's in there. We're giving you no index, we're giving you no guide, we're not organizing chronologically, but this is what you wanted. So, good luck. And that's where a narrow records request is incredibly helpful. Like Paul, you and I remember when Jeremy Boren ended up costing the director of Viscom his job. He was taking photographs of students while naked. The students were naked, not him. And Jeremy, who is a phenomenal journalist, I saw him, he says hello, by the way, I saw him last weekend. He and Laura came to visit. We knew what we had heard, and we had known how to ask for the specific institutional equity report, but we also knew not to ask for the photos, because had we asked for the photos, that would have shut down the entire request. And helpfully, University Council told me, hey, we can get you what you're asking for to a point, but the minute you're asking us to give nude photos of your classmates to you is going to cross a line, and everyone's going to put up roadblocks. So do yourself the favor. You are entitled to get them. Everyone involved will graduate without having seen the documents you're asking for. Like, we will dig in on this, and it will be in service of protecting the student from embarrassment, who had filed a complaint with the ombudsman. And it was taken on a university camera, stored on a university server. So it's a public record. But had we gone too far and gotten greedy for photos that we would never publish, you guys at the Post may still have been asking for this report. So it's surgical. You got to be precise with what you're asking for. And frankly, have a conversation with the records custodian. At least in the federal government, there's a FOIA coordinator at every agency.
Yep.
They're in the federal directory. Call them and ask them, hey, I'm thinking about this. I know this is an open record. This is not in doubt as an open record. What is going to be the easiest way for us to get that information from you in quick order, in a timely fashion? It's never going to be quick, but do we need to FOIA this is the first question. And I think you can get a lot of material without a FOIA.
Yeah, there's no doubt with what Phil just said. Reporting. I may be a lawyer now, but it's the same thing. A lot of my subpoenas come after depositions, after I ask very specific questions. I have the advantage of asking them under oath now, which I didn't have beforehand, but, in talking to the sources, because a lot of times, anytime I was doing freedom of information requests, we had an issue that basically a school, high school, these stories sound crazy, but they're the type of politics that go on, where the school basically was a soccer school and was moving to football because football made it more money. And, and there were parents who were upset about it. And you come into that story, and if you come in the wrong way, the athletic director is immediately looking at you that you're doing a hit piece. You've been hired by the soccer moms to come after him. And instead, you let him tell his side of the story, let him explain the economics of the situation. And then all of a sudden, you find them a lot more willing to turn over, emails and other documents willingly before you even hit a request button, because they are, explaining their process. And that is the key part of any stories. You really have to develop your sourcing and be fair about it, and how you approach somebody with any sort of story, or how you ask for records and everything else. Because, if you read the law, it's completely and 100% on your side and the lawyers know that. They are not going to be picking a fight with you over a lot of these things, but they will mess with you within the bounds of the law because they know where the bounds are and what's going to take for you to go to the court of claims or escalate something to a serious level. And normally when it's getting escalated, it's because you're asking for something like Phil said, something that's highly confidential, or medical records, attorney work product, where they're developing a case, the attorneys might have been evaluating the VisCom school guy, building a file themselves. You're never going to see that stuff. You may someday, but it'll probably be 25 to 75 years after the incident. So you have to understand what the limits are, because if you do go overbroad, and you'll see this in the legal outline, the other side will just basically use that. If you touch one of those third rails that Phil's alluded to, they're going to use that as an excuse to say, oh, that request touches the third rail, you're getting nothing. And they're not going to tell you why you touched the third rail. And that's why it's very specific that you have to be surgical. It's more of a scalpel than it is a shotgun, and you have to be very careful about it one way or another. I mean, a lot of the sourcing that I would do if I started a new job where I'd be going over and covering a public institution or a person that I'd be dealing with a lot, I would go out, reach out to them, have lunch with them. Phil definitely taught that very well, become, somebody that has a professional relationship, show up with coffee, show up with donuts, introduce yourself to the staff, introduce yourself to all the people who work in the room with your source. And again, just make it clear to them that you have a job to do, they have a job to do, and you're going to cross paths from time to time and build that relationship and that trust, because that's the same way, a lot of times I would go to a new job, do some freedom of information requests. If I had a big source, I'd want to read his email because I could. It was something that would allow me to see what they've been working on for the past 2 years. But if you just go in cold to a brand new source by saying, I want your last 2 years of email, that source isn't going to like you. And from that moment on, it's going to go from there. But if you go in, you talk to them and say, I'd really like to get up to speed with you. I'd really like to read your email. Next thing I know, athletic directors are turning over their emails to me, sharing stuff they think is important and raising issues. And again, you become better sourced, you become more informed, and you can write better journalism. So I agree completely with what Phil is hitting on. And I'm curious, Phil, like you mentioned those choke points that you hit, and that happens on any type of discovery dispute, whether you're a lawyer or anything else. What type of choke points are you hitting with some of your requests that you're going in now, if you can talk about some of them?
Yeah, especially just keeping narrow to January 6th. Ongoing investigation is a very common, like, this is an active investigation. We're not going to give you, we're not sure who we're going to end up charging. So we're going to hold back everything that we can, perhaps, about future charges. And I completely understand the reasoning for that, but it's also, you're going to charge this person. Like, this is going to happen. Like, I 100% know these 10 people are going to get charged. Like, it's just going to happen. So holding back their correspondence with members of Congress makes no sense. I mean, this is so Congress is exempt from FOIA. Congress, of course, Congress exempts itself from OSHA, exempts itself from FOIA. You cannot records request Congress, but you can records request Congress's communication with other federal agencies. So, Bob Menendez, who's chair of Senate Foreign Relations, writes a request to the State Department. You can request that through the State Department, and that's how you get that correspondence. But if I'm going to do that, I will call Menendez's office and give him a heads up that I'm asking for it, so that his team knows, I've asked for this. I know there was a letter. I've asked state for it. Why don't you just give it to me? And that's an easy way. Like, I have and Liz Sidoti, who was an editor of the Post, class of '99. She was my boss at the AP for a while. She has a rule with sources. I have knives. I'll never stab you in the back, but I will stab you in the front. You're gonna know the knife is coming. Just no surprises. And hey, I mean, I watched her on the McCain campaign. She was the lead reporter on McCain. I was the off-air embed. And there were days that she'd go to the front of the plane as we were traveling, hitting 5 states a day. And she'd pull aside McCain's chief of staff and tell him, hey, tomorrow's going to be a really bad day for you. I'm writing the story. I have all the comments. I have comment from your comms team, but you should let the senator know that he's going to be pissed off at me tomorrow. And that is a really useful way that, especially in politics, how to manage. I'm sure it's the exact same way in sports. I know it's that way in Congress. It is, you just having respect for your sources and giving them a heads up. Don't hide behind, oh, my editor wrote that headline. I mean, come on. If you're going to write a tough story, own it. You can disagree with the headline, but don't hide behind, well, my editor did it. Well, this got rewritten. No, you really do need to. If you're putting journalism out there in the world, you need to own it, whether it's records request based or political or campaign.
So, in that, Phil's hitting on something, big in lawyer firm. That's the same way. You don't slice the jugular. You put the knife up to their neck and you make clear to them one way or another that you have the information, you have the source, and they can either cooperate with you or they can basically continue to look foolish, because of no comment or taking the fifth. In a lawyer situation, said something in and of itself when you get to that point with them. And, with the records and information that you're requesting out there, one of the most common issues that, law, this is all we do is the first year of law school is debate, what is reasonable. That is it. That is basically the first year of law school, is discussing an undefinable term. So you see this all the time in information requests about the time it takes to turn over information. We do this as well with subpoenas. What was a reasonable subpoena response, whether I'm dealing with Chase Bank or a public institution, a police, anything, has changed. There is no doubt about it, because you would get a lot of different responses because of the COVID-19 pandemic going on. So what maybe was reasonable pre-COVID is no longer reasonable because of staffing issues and everything else. So it really defines the term, and really, how do you work that out? In law, you work it out by developing case law where the judges make determinations on what's reasonable or not. And to say that it's a simple definition that I can put in front of any of you is impossible, because there's lots of different cases for lots of different circumstances. And public record request law, having done that type of stuff on behalf of clients when I was a law clerk, and looking into these issues, because there's always people trying to expand FOIA in a lot of aggressive ways. And we as lawyers are always looking at how to respond to those issues. That is an important thing to understand, is that a reasonable amount of time can change. So it is very important, and that again, nice thing about working for Phil when I was at the Post is he had his relationship with the legal department where they could discuss these issues, and we didn't really have that many problems. If you guys are running into those problems at the Post, though, it's very important for you guys to, sometimes that becomes the story itself. How long does it take to, do these type of requests? Do that. We had that issue when I was at the Fayetteville Observer. We were having all sorts of different issues with state governments and local governments, that they all had very different standards on turning over information. So what we basically did was give everybody in our newsroom an assignment to go to a different public institution and request different things. Somebody went to a high school, asked for all of the principal's emails. Somebody else went down to the county auditor's office and asked for another set of public records. And what we did is we wrote down the responses, and some of them were not good. We didn't identify ourselves as members of the press. We were not required to, because anyone under most Information Act law, especially Ohio, can go in and make a Freedom of Information request. And whether you have to go through the whole rigmarole in the form, it doesn't really matter. As long, you don't need to have a copier, you don't need to have a computer. You just need to be able to show up in their office and go through the records. It's the same standard lawyers have too. If I'm representing somebody pro se or going against somebody pro se, I have to share subpoena records with them. But if they don't have the ability to access it, they will come to my office literally and sit in a conference room with huge stacks of records and go through them. And again, this is why it's important for you guys to understand your sources and, be able to understand what is reasonable and what is not. And what we did in Fayetteville, is we started publishing some of the responses. Like, the person who went in and asked for all the emails, of course, no, you can't have that. That's not allowed. And they might be right, because there may be certain things in there that would prevent certain emails from going out, period. If he is using the principal is using that email, for example, to converse with his doctor about a recent cancer diagnosis, you're not going to see that. And that's that example of something that is overly broad when you just say, I want all his emails. Well, if you read the actual law, you will know there's certain things you cannot get, and you should build that into your request to make it clear to the lawyers, you're not asking for that stuff, because that's when they're going to come back to you saying it's overly broad. You're asking for stuff that's protected by the statute. They'll probably cite some statutory code to you. They won't tell you exactly why they're doing it. Some will, some won't. Some lawyers like to play games. Some lawyers don't like to play games. It really depends on the situation, because usually, the type of games they play might depend on what type of information you're asking for and what they think the risk is for it, period. Their job is to zealously advocate for their client, and while they serve the public good, they are not, representing you. They are representing the institution, and they are going to do their best to protect that institution to a certain extent. So it's very, very important to understand that. And when you see lack of reasonableness, coming up, that allows you then to go to somebody like the head of the legal department and say, this type of request, has a different standard than this type of request, and build that institutional, knowledge and things like that. And Phil did that for us. We understood on our type of request. One, not only could Phil usually get us the information by just going over to, like you said, and having coffee with the legal director and telling them what we're looking for. I remember doing a story about the coal power plant that sits there right in the middle of the athletic fields. And a lot of that was just because, Phil was going over there talking to them, and they knew we were doing a story about it. And there was nothing really they could do about it one way or another, but Phil is over there talking to them. And again, you just don't run into some of that game playing that you guys seem to be encountering. And that, to me, is the important thing, is if you're seeing that over and over again, whether it's from Athens local government, which is always an interesting nut to crack, or just the university itself, which has a lot of interesting stories going on. I read the Post. The school is in a tough way after COVID-19. There's no doubt about it. So they're sensitive. They're very sensitive to a lot of these different issues. And, but it also it never looks good, and no lawyer, wants to fight with what we called the 16-gallon ink drum, back in the day. Now, I don't know, you fight with the internet. You're not going to want to have that type of fight. It's very important, that you appear to be following the letter of the law, and you have to be able to hold them accountable if that's not happening. And like I said, when we had that problem, that became a story by itself, just talking about the community and the different standards and just doing the responses. And really, after we did that story, it forced a lot of the local institutions to change their habits, because they just saw in real time that they were not honoring the law, that you're supposed to be able to walk in there, read on the wall what exactly their FOIA request policies are. I mean, they are literally supposed to be posted there. And that's why it's important. I know in the age of COVID, everything can be done over the phone, everything can be done via Zoom, but it is very important to remember that boots on the ground is always the best way. You want to be in those offices, you want to understand what's going on and build those relationships. And, Phil, have you ever been involved in any sort of, has it ever gone to any sort of litigation when you've had to do a Freedom of Information request?
Yeah, I actually wound up in litigation with Ohio State for for Jim Jordan's wrestling records when he was a coach there. He's currently a congressman, but he was an assistant wrestling coach, and I wanted to get his records. And luckily, apparently, he never had email. But luckily, I knew someone who worked in university relations, former member of Congress, Mary Jo Kilroy, who's a Democrat who hates Jim Jordan. I was like, Mary Jo, like, come on, you're telling me that there's really nothing here? She's like, I've looked. There's nothing there. It kills me, but there's nothing there. The other thing that I would just note that Shugar brought up was, I don't know how the Post is handling it now, but when we were seniors, only one person, me, filed open records requests. That way there was not a scattershot approach to it, and that we would pace so we weren't sending 50 at the start of the semester. That, okay, do you need this right now? Why don't we do this in 2 weeks? So that way it feels like we are having a nice churn. Everything is done on the same letterhead, same formatting, same legal argument. So that way there's just a consistency across the entirety of what we're asking the university for. And that way students, namely some very enthusiastic students in our cohort, weren't unilaterally asked. I mean, they were going to write the story, but that way hot heads weren't screaming at clerks at Chubb Hall for records. That it was, okay, we're going to have this conversation. We are both professionals. This is an open record. We have a right to it. We know it exists. Just give it to us already. And that really helped keep tensions low. And that even on really tough stories, when we were seniors, we never got to the point of escalating to using the Student Press Law Center. We always had that in our back pocket. We also always had Tom Hotson, a former judge who knows this stuff, former editor of the Post, now at WOUB. I could always call Tom and be like, Tom, little help here. And he knew the open records laws as well as anyone and could help us. Okay, here's a follow-up note to send to legal, ratcheting it up a little bit, but still keeping everyone civil. And I think that is a problem I've seen in other newsrooms, especially here in Washington, where the default is going nuclear, and that just makes everything unworkable. Yeah, you have the right to go nuclear, but man, you have to work with these people on the next story and the next story after that. Like, there are some people, especially in Washington, who are here for 40 years and they're at every single story. So if you have bad blood with them, you're just going to have, especially on campaigns, your luggage gets lost pretty quickly. Similarly, if you're civil and, hey, I know my luggage is now en route to Grand Rapids, Michigan, but I need to reroute to Detroit. Do you have a volunteer who can courier my luggage so I can switch planes? It's like, yeah, you bought us drinks the other night. That was really nice of you to get a cheesecake for Joey's birthday. Like, just little things like that make life so much easier, both for you and for them. And really, a $25 cheesecake from Giant Eagle is not going to change anyone's finances, but it's the gesture. Similar, like dropping off, I've been getting records requests now from the January 6th Commission. I just dropped some baked and wired there the other day, just for the front office in the panel that has helped me out with information. Not expecting anything, but just to thank you. You're professional. Please have a great weekend.
Professionalism is so key. It is, as a lawyer and even as a journalist, skills that are hard to develop and hard to learn. And because that's the thing, we all come in with a lot of fire in our belly, And, and that was the thing. Don't let Phil fool you. I've seen lots of fire in Phil's belly over the years, and I'm still seeing it's there. And I appreciate that about him right now. But it's one of those things that, you're a journalist, you're a professional, just like the lawyer. And I actually always enjoyed talking to the lawyers. I didn't realize I was going to be one at the time, but I enjoyed talking to them because they, could talk to me and I would learn a lot, that basically some of my FOIA requests sucked. They were just overbroad, aggressive attacks that landed like the lead balloon that they were. And especially when when it was at the Post, Phil was the point man on it and made us all better journalists for a lot of reasons, because he kept that relationship very near and dear to his heart. You guys need to do the same thing. The relationships you build at OU and at your different sources, you never know when those sources are going to be valuable to you again. You just don't know. They have a long shelf life. Life is long. The people, the kid you cover, yesterday as a point guard for his high school basketball team, who's now, the offensive coordinator for the Dallas Cowboys. You never know where people are going to go and where their lives are going to lead. So it's very, very important to be a professional. I know everybody thinks they're a journalist and they've got a big story and they've got something to do, but sometimes stories develop slowly and time, and building that sourcing, it can take a year or so. I always said that I worked for 3 different newspapers. I always said I never really wrote anything good until I got into about my 2nd year of any of those papers, because you got to learn the community, learn your sources, develop relationships, and to just light that on fire and torch it over a FOIA request or fighting about it, the lawyers are going to think you're silly. If you read the outline that I sent you, what is it? $100 a day? What is the process? You're going to file a complaint at the Court of Claims, and then they're going to, refer you to mediation. That's where it's going to go. You're not going to get your day in court or have this big decision. It's going to try to be mediated, where they actually talk to the other sides about what is the issue here, where is the communication breaking down. So try to be proactive and not get to that point. Mediation is designed in legal cases for sides that cannot talk to each other. Even the lawyers cannot talk to each other usually, and that is a problem, and it prevents the cases from actually being evaluated and being done, and it's going to cause you the same problems with your stories. So think about that. It's funny when Phil brings up Ohio State, because my cousin, who worked for the Ohio Attorney General's office doing public records requests, and now he's not a lawyer, doesn't technically have a legal job with Ohio State, but that's what he does, is freedom of information requests. He deals with them all the time. And, as a lawyer, who never was a journalist, we have interesting conversations about requests. And that's the one thing he just says is journalists don't know what they're doing, nor do they know how to talk to us, nor do they have any interest in talking to us. They view us, and that's just a huge, gigantic mistake. Lawyers and journalists, there is a very thin line between it, other than one has gone to school and paid way too much money for their degree compared to the other. There is not much difference, other than we have some easier tools that when we ask you a question, it's under oath. I love that one. And on top of that, when I issue a subpoena, that's a court order and you have to turn over those documents. And same way, so many people do not understand that the legal process, a lot of the really good reporting that you see is built in courthouses, because people are hanging out there where there's tons of public records, tons of interesting things going on. I think it's one of the most overlooked aspects of any area, because, in Phil's world, of course they have people watching the Department of Justice like a hawk, but I can tell you right now, nobody's watching the Cuyahoga County Courthouse, and that includes the plain dealer. There's stories left and right if you just watch the docket, but because the plain dealer's newsroom is a third of what it used to be, there's nobody there watching. And same way, what is going on in Athens? If you actually sit there in the courtroom and see what's going on in the docket, just spend a day there. You will hear more interesting stories than you can possibly imagine. And it's all public record. There's stuff being filed. The subpoenaed records are being filed. They're being put in the court. The depositions are being filed, sometimes video depositions. I mean, there's all sorts of different ways to get information that doesn't only just require a FOIA request, just like Phil said, and using that to your advantage. You never know what you're going to find.
I'm really glad that Jessie made it out of redistricting to come join us for a little bit.
They're actually only in recess, which just tells you about how well this is going here in Columbus. But I'm not sure what all I missed, so I don't want to like kind of jump over what everyone else has already said. I guess I would just initially push back on the perception that there aren't reporters outside of DC and New York doing this good work and finding those public records and using them, including the Plain Dealer, but also the Cincinnati Enquirer and Dispatch. But yeah, no, to Paul's point, which is a good one, is there are records everywhere, and you're not just going to get them in your public records requests. And I try to compile a list of just places where you could get some of these records, anything from like your local, we have a state campaign finance records, you have federal campaign finance records. There are public disclosures that every candidate has to fill out. So that includes the Athens city mayor all the way up to the governor of Ohio. And that's going to start to show you some of the connections between what businesses they have, what nonprofits they're affiliated with. And that starts to get at, possible conflicts of interest that you can find. I think one that television stations always hit really hard are like public inspections for like health and building codes, but I'm sure students would be fascinated, like what is the most problematic slumlord in Athens or something like that. I mean, I think you can find a lot of gems in, small claims courts and stuff like that. So there's just a treasure trove of information out there, and a lot of people aren't mining it. There aren't enough people mining it, to be sure.
No doubt.
And then just pointing out one that has been useful for us recently is text messages. Former Speaker of the Ohio House is facing federal corruption charges in Ohio right now, but he had a bill that he wanted to kill in part because he didn't like the lawmaker who was putting it forward. And so he was texting various members of the Ohio legislature about how he wanted to destroy this bill. And so we were able to get those records and write a interesting story about how this guy who's under indictment is still trying to influence the way things work. I think public officials are going to get wise to that and start deleting those more frequently. But so far it's been it's been a treasure trove of information.
Just out of curiosity, Jessie, legally, with getting a text message, which is behind federal telecommunications law, one, and then, did he have a phone as Speaker of the House? Like he actually had his own phone that he was texting from, not a personal phone?
He was texting from his personal phone to state officials who were public officials. And I think there was a case, I think involving the Enquirer, but it was Jack Greiner down at Graydon had that said text messages were public records in Ohio, at least, because public officials are using them like emails, and often in lieu of emails, to try to get around that creation of records. So that's been a new venue, and it's been interesting because people are just like way more blunt in text messages than they are in their professional emails.
Abby, while we have everybody here, what questions do you guys have for our free, really amazing? I mean, I could listen to these stories all evening, and I know that a lot of you guys can too, but what questions or issues do you have going on that these folks can lend their wisdom to right now?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, everyone. Thanks for being with us tonight. We all really appreciate it. And I know there's a lot of folks who said they'd be interested in watching the recording. So thank you on their behalf as well. But you all already kind of touched on a lot of the questions that I had, which is awesome. But another question that I had is we've had some issues where, the typical some requests are fulfilled really quickly and others are kind of, taking even up to like hundreds of days to get fulfilled. So what more can like any sort of postee or student journalist do if their request is unfulfilled? Aside from, just making sure they're following up and making themselves available to, chat on the phone about, the request or stuff of that nature.
Go to the office. I mean, go to the office and talk, or the legal department and ask about the type of records they're looking at and what the delays are. It's hard to answer that question when it's so general, because these are so factual specific when you're dealing with a records request, because the law, it just, again, depends on factors. COVID itself is a factor, then you throw in all the other different things that could be going on in that office with their custodian of records and their record policies. The key is to ask questions and try to understand what the issue is, and then try to help them solve the problem. Is it because they don't have a way to produce that record because it's they just don't have printouts, or they don't create paper records of that effect? Sometimes you have to get screenshots. I get that a lot when I subpoena federal agencies, because you're asking for something that they can get you, but they don't have an easy way to do it, because maybe their computer system, they don't have a Windows computer. They're literally using a DOS computer. So, you say something to them like, oh, well, take a screenshot. And they're like, no, we can't do that. That our technology is from the 90s. You don't understand. And I'm like, I do understand. I grew up in the 90s, but but then you have to find a different way to solve the problem, which is sometimes taking screenshots with phones or discussing what the issue is. So it's very important to discuss the issue with the legal department or whoever that contact is, and be trying not just to say, gimme, but how can I help you solve your problem so I can get this information, because I know you're working hard to get it for me.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. I think we have a few other posties in here. I'm not sure if y'all have any other questions you'd like to ask too.
Yeah, so I'll introduce myself. I'm Jillian. I'm the senior writer, or one of the senior writers for the Post. And I'm working on a story about like hazing at different Ohio MAC colleges. So I asked for records from January 10th, 2010 until I think December, or maybe it was September, when I requested them for 2021. And every college except for University of Toledo has sent me those records back. And in fact, they haven't said anything other than that they acknowledged the request. So, and I asked their communications director, like, hey, what's up? Like, do you have a status update on when I might be receiving these? Because it's been literal months. So I don't really know where to go next.
So I might point out to them that you've made a similar request of X number of other universities, and we've been able to get similar responsive records from those colleges. And sometimes I'll even like put them, this is more with like smaller boards of elections, but I would like put them in contact with one another, be like, hey, so-and-so figured out how to do it. Maybe they can help you pull this same record for me. But I think just like pointing out that they're like the last one standing, I think is sometimes helpful.
I would also just not to understand, without specifics of what you're looking for, what might also be an interesting piece of correspondence is, Office of Greek Life, wherever it sits inside student affairs of the institutions, their correspondence with the international headquarters, because that is a letter they're generating to the profession. I mean, as a member of the Greek community, when I was at OU, there's a lot of correspondence between the local chapter and the university and international headquarters always in Indianapolis. All fraternities are based in Indianapolis for tax law. Because if you are under 1 acre, you don't pay property tax. So there are 0.95 acre plots through Fraternity Village in Indianapolis. They're really good at that. But the correspondence between the university student affairs and the international headquarters could be interesting correspondence that may have fallen through the cracks on disciplinary hearings, that there is going to be a privacy, I mean, maybe even a HIPAA privacy issue with the disciplinary, but there is no, you could find a way to get around that if, student affairs is writing to Indianapolis about specific chapters that are problematic. That might be a second bite of the apple where you could get the correspondence that isn't immediate in the disciplinary records.
I also would recommend database searching a lot for that one, and just trying to find examples of different cases at different universities that have gone to case, where you may find just being able to pull public dockets. The librarians, as someone who's raised by a librarian, I can tell you, they are your friend. They are an amazing source. And where you use them or anything else, I use them to this day. I still talk to librarians at different law libraries or at different for sources because they can help you find out different ways to gather information. But I definitely would be going to databases and trying to see what else is out there, in the public sphere already, because there's usually plenty in those type of situations, whether it's a civil case or a criminal case.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. I also had a follow-up question of like not when, but like where to look for certain records if it comes to like court stuff, because I'm interested in covering that, especially for the Post, but I don't even know where to look. And sometimes the results I get just from Googling can be really confusing to navigate.
Does your Alden credential give you access to Pacer?
I actually have no idea, to be honest with you.
I live on Pacer. So I would check. I know at Georgetown, the students have access to Pacer through the library's website once they're behind the firewall. I would be surprised if Alden doesn't have something similar. You're paying the money for student fees to have access to the library. Exploit the library's resources as much as you can. I'm a big fan, like Paul, I'm a big fan of using libraries for that.
Yeah, I would just add, so Pacer is going to be all of your federal cases, your state court cases. Like you can go to Athens Police or OUPD and they'll have incident reports. So incident reports are public records. 911 calls are public records in Ohio. Anything that's kind of like that initial report of a crime. And then you kind of hit this very large confidential law enforcement investigatory records gap where you can't see a whole lot of things. And then like once the case is completely closed, then a lot of those records become public again. The other thing you can look at is indictments, which are going to be at like your common pleas court. So Athens at the courthouse, or municipal court is kind of your lower level offenses. So both of the courthouses are going to have some things, and then both police departments, if you just want to get a sense of like what records are out there.
Yeah, the court dockets, we get docket reports for the whole state of Ohio. And I read them because I find them fascinating and because it shows so much what's going on and different trends and everything else. And again, it just, what used to be, when I talk to old journalists at the Plain Dealer, a 5-person beat just to cover, because Cuyahoga County, I'm sorry, one person can't do it. We are talking about one of the largest, next to South Central LA, largest criminal dockets in the country. And there's so much going on, Pacer, great tools, but the databases that you need to have and use, Google's a great start. 95%, and I think most people start their research with Google. but it should not end there. You know, that is really superficial. It's how I view any type of Google search when I'm evaluating anything for one of my cases or anything else. Then once I may take that and may take the key terms that I developed out of my Google search, but then I will take it into the databases, and whether it's Pacer, Westlaw, Bloomberg, LexisNexis, the tools that come off that, the people finders, the different tools that you can employ on that, you know, it is very, very important. I cannot stress this enough. Again, another thing, when I saw newspapers cutting, you know, at the Seattle Times company, we had a librarian. She was amazing to just develop off your own sourcing. But a lot of newspapers have cut that, and they don't have librarians. They would have a librarian in the building who would have access and would be able to tell you that. I mean, the first person I would meet, again, I was raised by a librarian, so I was weird. She always would take us to LexisNexis, you know, searches and everything else. I remember that was the early days of the internet for me when I was a little kid. So, you know, this, you know, you have to use these tools because they are out there, they're available, and there's other databases just being created. You know, Justice Brenner, who is keeping Jessie very, very busy today, you know, was at our firm, you know, because she's running for Chief Justice and starting to do her campaigning, you know, and she was just talking to us about all the databases that they are trying to create, you know, in Ohio, just to track, you know, for example, they're trying to track racial bias. And again, there's 88 counties in Ohio, and there's 88 judges who don't really answer, you know, yeah, I guess they all answered to Justice O'Connor, but not really. You know, they are the elected official, and they can make their own decisions. So there's a lot of pushback and everything else going on there. But there's a huge database out there right now filled with data to mine. And that's why you see in this latest, I thought it was fascinating when I read the latest version of the statute, they're not allowing commercial mining of that. They have a restriction on that now, you know, because they understand that some of these public databases that they are created could be very much exploited, just like a Facebook app on your phone or any other type of data mining information source on your phone. So there's all these databases out there, you know, and that's the thing. Call the Supreme Court, find out what type of databases they are out there, what new databases are starting. You might find a new story right there because of the idea that this data wasn't being tracked previously. And that's a key thing, and why you talk to a lot of people who are looking at the sources or what databases they are, because a lot more public institutions are understanding the power of data just like everyone else. But whether you know what they're tracking or what they're not tracking, again, comes down to your sourcing with that institution.
Okay, so I have a follow-up question to that. So I sometimes have roommates who aren't journalism majors who are like, hey, can you look up this court document for me? Or can you look up this court case for me? Because they know that I figure out how to find information somehow, some way. So what if we're struggling to find a particular court case that like we know for sure exists, but like can't come across it?
So go ahead.
Go ahead, Phil. Go ahead.
No, I mean, we're running into this with really incomplete files on the online docket for the DC Superior Court as it relates to the January 6th. Like some of the documents just aren't on the docket. We know the document has been filed and it just shows up file not found. Like maybe they didn't scan it, maybe it was in the wrong format, maybe just, I don't know, they just didn't do it. But going to the courthouse and asking the clerk, can I see the docket on this? And most of the time, they're more than happy to give it to you. That it's the open record of that court proceeding. And they're, you know, right now, like I'll set aside a day or two a week just to go down to the courthouse and like fill in the gaps of the January 6th people, because frankly, some of the back end data for DC courts is garbage. But showing up and building a relationship. When I worked the local cop beat in Marietta, I mean, they knew the overnight dispatch knew I'd be rolling in at 6 a.m. every day to see the overnight arrest reports, and they would just have a copy of the file sitting there, because I had until 7 a.m. We were an afternoon newspaper, but I had till 7 a.m. if there was an overnight, shooting, stabbing, arson. I had an hour, and they recognized and respected that the Marietta Times was the only place that's actually going to publish what's happening in that small town. Let's make it easy. This, the rotating, cast of 22, 23-year-olds who go through that newsroom, and it's just assumed that you're the new guy. You have the very early morning, you have morning cops, and building that relationship. It's, if you do it in person, they'll help you out over the phone eventually, but showing up and doing the work really matters on all beats, really. Showing up at Bumblewazoo, Iowa for someone's corn festival really makes sure that saying hello to the candidate shows you're committed to doing the story and doing it right and traveling. And I worry that this is completely tangential. You can't do journalism by Twitter. You actually have to go out in the field, and what Jessie's doing right now. You have to be there and commit journalism in person. And that would be my advice for the posties is, don't rely on Google. Go get paper cuts.
Without a doubt, what Phil just said is the key. You got to be in there. I'm a lawyer. The court has gone completely digital. I appear by Zoom. I'm on spring break with my kids. I'll be appearing in court twice. I didn't have to continue hearings because I can. Everything can be filed now electronically. You got to go in. Those relationships and the turnover in some of these positions and everything with the Great Resignation is a real thing. The same relationships that I had pre-COVID are not there in the clerk of courts that I've had, and you have to go in there and you have to start over, but you have to be seen and you have to be known, because those type of relationships are going to be so important. And sometimes it's impossible to do a story that way. And Zoom helps. You can actually be seen by somebody. I do that. Sometimes I have to represent a client who's all the way in California. I'll never meet them face to face. But, to be able to be seen with them, I'm scheduling some of the meetings off the phone just to be seen, let them interact with me, see that I'm a normal human being, not just their lawyer. You have to be in the room. And I know, COVID, it's created a lot of interesting changes, but it will never, ever beat that face-to-face, because that's the issue, is just a lot of it most likely is, like Phil said, unless you're seeing a motion to file under seal, and a lot of courts are hesitant to even grant that. There could be other reasons why it doesn't end up on the public docket. It may have a lot of confidential financial information that gets filed in it. Sometimes courts will do that. HIPAA is a huge reason for a document not to show up on a public docket when it's available. But in Athens, I don't know if Athens court is online, but I can tell you most of the counties around it are not. I sometimes appear in counties down there. It's different, and you have to have that type of relationship, where you can walk into that courtroom and be seen and talk to people, and that is going to help you get those records and go from there. So again, you're just never going to find everything on Google.
I want to make sure that we are respectful of these folks' time. I know Paul is on vacation. Jessie is still working.
Jessie's working
for hopefully not much longer, but
oh gosh.
But
we just can't pass a constitutional map to save our lives over here. So we're definitely gonna be the last one. We're usually like a back 25 state, and we're just really going for 49 this time.
Go Ohio. But I don't want to speak for this group, but I will just speak for our alumni organization and just say that we are always here to help students. And we have a lot of posties that want to help and are willing to help. And if y'all continue to have challenges or questions, we've got a lot of smart people on Zoom today, and also just in our organization. So don't hesitate to reach out, whether through Abby or Ryan is the new editor. Am I remembering that correctly, Abby?
Yep, it's Ryan
Oh,
Madison.
Okay, thank goodness. And I will just do a plug for our reunion. We wish we could be in Athens with all of you this weekend, very much so, but we are going to be getting together virtually. If you are a student and you want to come, Abby has all that good info, but I've also put the registration link in the chat to make sure you get the Zoom link from 10:30 to 12:30 on Saturday. The upside is you can wear your pajamas, and it should be a very helpful, informative time. And hopefully next year we will be able to all be back in Athens, networking and talking together. But unless anyone has anything for the good of the order, like I said, I want to be really respectful of everybody's time and your willingness to help out students and the Post. So unless anyone has anything they'd like to add or any last minute questions, I just want to say I appreciate you all, and I think, and we will send, this was recorded, so the students will get a copy to watch later, and Abby has all of the attachments in an email to share as well. So, but thank you everybody so much.
Thank
Great
you
to
all.
see you guys.
Good to see you guys.
Great
Thanks,
to be here.